Next up is yet another high-octane panel discussion on a pertinent topic, strategies for net zero carbon emissions. We have an eminent lineup of speakers today for you. First up, Mr. Praveen Sahay, founder and managing director at Wave Equity Partners. Welcome, sir. Mr. Shailesh Singh, co-founder at Massive Mobility. Mr. Satish, chairman and CEO at Echo Electronics. Ms. Anjali Bunsen, founder at Avaana Capital. Mr. Philip Berman, CEO and co-founder of GLR Tech, and Mr. Ranvijay Lamba, who will be donning the hat of a moderator, is the managing director and country head of Arcesium India. Thank you everyone for taking the time out and joining us today. Let's move on with our panel, and over to you, Mr. Lamba.
Hi, thank you so much, and welcome to all the panelists, speakers. It's great to have you, join us. The topic of strategies for net zero carbon emission probably stands out at the top when you talk about sustainability. And all of you, we are lucky to have, who in the space and doing a lot of work in the same area. So I think I'll start by giving a little brief about you. And I don't think I can do justice with one liner. So I would really love to hear what, all of our audiences would love to hear what you're doing in space, maybe, a couple of things. So we do have Shailesh Singh with us, as mentioned, is co-founder of Massive Mobility, which is basically working towards creating a fully electric mobility ecosystem in India. He's also an angel investor. He's part of Climate Angels. They do early stage investments of sustainability startups in pollution reduction and climate change. We have Satish with us. Satish is a social entrepreneur, an early stage investor in socially relevant technology-based startups. He's worn a lot of hats. He's established digital partners in India that started social entrepreneurship movement, and later merged with Grameen Technologies of Nobel Prize winner Mr. Mohammad Yunus. He co-founded Desi Power that created 100 kilowatt power generators using hybrid renewable energy, and this was replicated across 100 villages. Then we have Mr. Praveen Sahay. Mr. Praveen Sahay is a founder managing director of Wave Equity Partners. It's a Boston-based private equity company. He supports companies solving some of the world's greatest challenges for clean energy, food, wastewater, and clean air. Like I said, they're wearing lots of hats. He's led army battalions as a deputy commander in India, something that will not come up today in our topic. He also has been awarded the UN Peace Medal. If we get time, we'll probably touch on that. Then we have Ms. Anjali Bunsen. She's the founder of Avaana Capital, investing in innovation-led startups that create transformational impact at scale. She's been appointed as president, Bombay Chamber of Commerce and Industries, and serves on the CIA National Committee on Corporate Governance. And you'll be happy to know she's been listed as one of the most powerful women in Indian business by India's leading publications, Business Today and Fortune India. We also have Philip Berman joining us from Brazil. He's founded his first company at the age of 21. So he's been an entrepreneur all his life, I think. He's the CEO and co-founder of GLR Tech. It's a startup that has started to gain a lot of attention in the market. So we just go around the room, and maybe starting with Philippe in a reverse order. If you can give a couple of lines or 2 minutes about what you're doing in the space.
Sure. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here as a panelist. Thank you very much. I am the CEO of GLR Tech. It's a startup to help with carbon neutral through a 3-in-1 device to filter pollutants, capture refined particles, and generate energy from waste. And actually it will benefit engines burning fossil fuels and also chimneys of boilers and also industrial furnaces. So actually, during the last years, I worked in the Israeli Ministry of Environmental Protection. I was part of the Israeli delegation in the Rio Plus 20, which was the UN Conference on Sustainable Development here in Brazil. I am an Israeli president, and I'm also an advisor for a very good initiative of the BRICS on sustainable development. When I say BRICS, it's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And my opinion about the theme that we're going to talk today is, like if you want to make a difference and deeply contribute to net zero carbon emissions, you must be ahead of any emission regulation. I really support new technologies. I think that we can't wait for new regulation to find the solution, a new solution. So it will cost more, and you will not be recognized as an innovative company. So I believe that governments and different nations need to join forth, and corporations need to be ahead of the time and invest before the emission regulations appear to force them to invest. That's my introduction. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you so much. Anjali, can we hear something about you?
Thank you, Ranvijay, and thank you very much, Ty, for hosting this Global Sustainability Summit. As I've said earlier as well, I believe sustainability and climate change are the most, in capitals, the most important burning issues of our times. I think we owe it to our next generation to leave the world a better place than what we found it, and certainly what our generation has done with it. But beyond that, I do a couple of things in addition to leading Avaana Capital, and I will speak about Avaana Capital. I also serve on the board of Tata Power, which is one of the largest integrated power companies in India. And we, as you know, are very committed to pursuing and promoting the cause of helping Bharat get to net zero. And as many of you would have heard, Jayant Sinha has introduced, a member of parliament has introduced a private member's bill to promote the green frontier. And we very sincerely, strongly believe in the green frontier. So Avaana as a firm and as a fund, we look for technology-led innovation businesses that promote the cause of sustainability while generating commercial returns. We strongly believe, and I personally strongly believe, and as a firm, we believe that what digital was for the last 20 years, sustainability will be for the next 20. It will be ubiquitous. It will require us, all of us, whether they are large companies or startups or mid-sized companies, to actually create integrated business models. What was considered to be a neat little vertical called ESG or CSR tucked away in a company will now need to be a horizontal, much like digital is a horizontal embedded across all functions and all business units of any enterprise. A lot of the problems that we see today with climate change, as well as sustainability, and sustainability is a little bit broader than net zero, but net zero is an important part of it. Those problems will get solved through new models, new technologies that are created in the startup innovation ecosystem, but will require the capital and will require large-scale adoption, both by consumers and by enterprises, for them to actually become ubiquitous. So very excited to be here, and I'm sure I will learn a lot through this panel as well, and will look forward to contributing to the discussion.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Great to have you. Shailesh, would you give us, let the audience know what magic you do?
Yeah, hi. Hi, I'm Shailesh here. I'm founder of Massive. Before starting Massive, I was a VC tech investor with seed fund. I started Massive around 3 years back, where we are building the whole ecosystem to fund companies which are solving climate change pollution. So I'm part of a fund called Climate Angels, and we have done close to 5 investments, which are totally focused on solving pollution in India, which is started from the lead based recycling to sustainable consumption, so multiple challenges. Apart from that, I am founder of Massive Mobility, which has just signed up a large contract with Hero Electric to set up close to 10,000 chargers across India to support adoption of 2-wheelers and 3-wheelers. So that's what I do. Thanks.
Thank you for being here. Praveen, would you share, all the good stuff you do?
Sure. Everything I wanted to say, Anjali has already said that about the need for sustainability and how it is going to become a ubiquitous solution across, residential, commercial, and government sectors. I founded Wave Equity Partners about 8 years ago. And prior to that, was working in venture capital. Ranvijay, you alluded to the fact that before I got into investment, I was doing a variety of other things. I started my career in India, worked in ONGC, in the civil services, in the police department, went to work with the United Nations, where I was the national coordinator of elections for Mozambique. And then came to the US, got my MBA, and started in venture capital in year 2000. 2003 or so, the whole clean tech started to evolve very rapidly in the US. Unfortunately, by 2013 or so after about 10 years, the whole clean technology sector was gasping for air. The early investments in solar and wind and biofuel and so forth had such a terrible outcome in the US. And obviously 2008, economic slide had definitely something to do with it, plus the China factor. All of the technologies, essentially moved to China, willingly or unwillingly. So 2013, was a time when the clean tech sector had almost disappeared in the US. And we took the contrarian strategy of starting a firm to focus exclusively on sustainability, but with a primary focus on manufacturing innovations, not just software. And the reason for that was not only our own backgrounds, but also the fact that if you're trying to get a very substantial leap in innovation, 20, 30, 40% superior efficiency and cost effectiveness, software alone is not going to do it. You have to re-engineer how you build things and how you process water, how do you reprocess waste, and so forth. So you have to look at fundamental innovations in physics and chemistry and engineering. So we now have two funds. We are currently allocating about $20 million of growth capital to each company. And we are now working on our third fund, which will increase the allocation to $30 to $40 million per company. Our companies are involved in, energy, food, water, waste. So we have, one of our companies, all of the long-term COVID vaccinations are shipped in their boxes because they have the highest insulation. We have advanced materials company, carbon capture company, aeroponics and indoor farming, high efficiency industrial equipment, EV battery companies, and so forth. So it's been a very interesting journey so far. When we started, we felt very alone in the world. Now there are many more private equity funds and venture capital firms coming up. So it is all moving in the right direction.
Thank you so much, Praveen. Satish, can you hear me? I think he was having connectivity issues. All right. We'll probably join Satish again when he's resolved. So I'm going to start the session with, a line that was published about 3-4 years back by IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is the world is in a race against time, and we have 30 years to cut global carbon emissions to net zero. If we were to limit global warming to 1.5 centigrade and mitigate potential catastrophic impacts of climate change. Now, while a lot of countries have continued to pledge to achieve zero net emissions, but there is a very large set of population that believes we are well short of what is required to bring about net zero. So the question is, are we running out of time? Right. Anjali, what's your thoughts around that?
Oh, absolutely. I think it is a race against time. And when we think about net zero, we actually have to think about shifting the paradigm to net positive. So net zero is basically saying we will curtail carbon emissions or balance it off. But the real victory will happen if we are able to find business models and ways of living, working, consuming, eating, moving that actually are net positive and help us not just reduce carbon, but find ways to not emit carbon at all. And move to entirely different ways of working. We don't know today what they will be. Just as I mentioned, 20 years ago, none of us could have imagined the scale of digital business models that have emerged today. So what will these models be? We don't know, but that's exactly what we are here to do. As venture investors, we like to spot trends early. We like to support early technologies, as Praveen mentioned. And today, actually, we are sitting at this very magical trifecta, which is consumer preferences, technology, and capital. Today's consumers, particularly the millennials, post-millennials, even the Gen Zs, they are willing to pay a little bit more, even in countries like India, for better sustainable products, so goods and services. And more importantly, today's talent wants to work at companies that they see are more responsible. So this consumer preferences, and we know whenever consumer preferences evolve, large profit pools get created, large businesses get created, and capital follows. So we are seeing big capital shift taking place in the ESG space, particularly with funds like BlackRock and Norwegian Pension Fund and so on. So in the large listed company space, this is a given. If you are not responsible, you don't get money, you don't get capital. So there's consumer preference, there's capital, and then the third part of that is technology. Technology is now available, and Praveen, you mentioned the early days of clean tech investing. where it was perhaps a little bit ahead of its time and technology could not find the adoption curves. Today, we have the technology, it is finding adoption curves, both consumer tech as well as enterprise tech. So using big data for better decision making, whether it is in agriculture or it is in water and waste management, frankly, even for CapEx decisions for companies, for insurance, for lending, for credit assessment. I mean, I could go on, but the trifecta of consumer preferences, capital, and technology, and very, very strongly supported by policy, global policy, and national policy. I think we are at an absolutely perfect juncture to do more than just net zero. But it is a race against time.
Thank you so much. That's a positive start. Good to have Satish Jha, Mr. Satish Jha on. So Mr. Satish Jha is a social entrepreneur and an early stage investor in socially relevant technology-based startups. A very well-known name. He's established digital partners in India that started social entrepreneurship movement and later merged with Grameen Bank. I think I spoke about this earlier. And he's been chairman of ECCO Electronics in Delhi, which was designing and making solar lamps a long time back, and which became one of the best in the world. He was also the chairman of One Laptop Per Child project for India, and has been in the space for a very long time. Good to have you, sir, on. It'll be good to hear a couple of lines from you about, all that you've been doing in this space.
Well, thank you very much. To begin with, I look at myself as an odd member of this team with the people like Praveen and Anjali. They are totally involved in this every day. And my association is primarily from the point of view of, looking at the future, trying to do what little we can do from whichever end we end up being at. An association began when the Prime Minister Gandhi invited me to join MNES sometime about 35 years ago. And I was supposed to take the whole idea about renewable energies and look at that and take it to people who were skeptics. So my role primarily was communication at that point in time in MNES, and later on I got involved in multiple projects. But what I'm saying is that technology is a critical factor, the way technology evolves, but at the same time, the way policy comes into play. Policies end up having a major impact in changing the way things are going to roll out. For instance, a single decision made by both President Bush and Obama at one point in time, they made huge changes. They picked up smaller aspects of technology that could make an impact, and they, for instance, 10% addition in the fuel of something which is renewable as such. That did something huge. So policies, the way we move in that direction, that can have much larger impact. Of course, everything has an impact. I'm not questioning that at all. But in the case of developing countries, the policy has been much bigger a driver. In the case of the global market, obviously technology is a big driver. Capital gets into play, just like Anjali said. So when I look at Indian context, I think the largest impact has been not the consumer side so much, because no matter how aware you make them, the awareness, the club of those who become aware is not more than 5-6% of the population. What the state does, that has a huge impact, rightly, wrongly, poorly designed, whatever they may be, but that has impact. So in that sense, the training of the policy makers in the countries like in India and say Africa and those countries which basically will have to respond to it, and their responsibilities come even before they have reaped the benefits of the previous revolution, and that question always remains on the table as such in their mind. So I think if we get the policy planners to become more aware of and begin to make better refined policies from the point of view of future goals, and always think 30 to 40 years instead of just looking at immediate term. But then the governments function in a unique way. They like to do something which is good for elections. So their perspective is very often 5 years, unless you have a leader like, say, Obama or Bush, who really wants to make a big move in that direction. Things won't really change. So if you look at the larger population, particularly, it's very simple world. And in one way, if you look at it, 1.5 billion people in India, 1.5 in Africa, 1.5 in China. These are the 4.5 billion people where things are going to be shaping up tomorrow. And are they able to take a 30 to 40 year perspective? That will be very relevant from going net zero or net positive, as Anjali said. So I think somewhere educating the policy planners, that should be one of the critical points of agenda that we should have.
A related question about the countries that you mentioned. There's a big gap between per capita consumption of energy across these, and there are different countries. So should the metric be the same for doing enough to achieve the 2050 goal? Because each one's coming. China has set a goal of 2060. Brazil, actually, I was going to come to later. They had a goal of 2060 till 4-5 months back, but it's been announced to be 2050 without any interim changes. So is it a lot more, lot of announcements with not enough, in the sense we don't have time. We have 30 years of targets. You don't want to be after 10 years having missed the interim targets, right?
Okay, my understanding of that is that governments, when they plan, they don't really have anything on the ground. They plan because the United Nations said that, the Committee of Nations said that, the club of those who make big decisions, they have said that, but they don't have anything on the ground to work with. But when something happens like cell phone of technology, I think it's a very good example. In 1985, India couldn't have taken even 200 years to get 600 million people of 1985 on the phone. But technology comes in 5 years from 1995 to 2000, you have the majority of the nation on the phones. So sometimes technology helps in a big way, and that's what's going to be a major factor. But these countries are not planning with any sense of tomorrow. They're just aspirationally trying to get there. They're trying to meet the expectations from them, from the leaders. They keep meeting in those forums because they like to be in those forums, etc. But there is no groundwork being done here. Things become possible only when the world creates technologies at the level of simplicity that become cell phone of, say, communication, or cell phone of energy, or cell phone of net zero, something at that level of simplicity. That's when government begins to really respond.
Satish, you're so accurate on this. I'll give you an example from the energy industry, similar to cell phones. So if you look at the cost of solar energy, it has declined by 90% in the last 10 years. They achieved the cost point 30 years ahead of the IPCC forecast. So the policymakers and the governments, can only act on information which is available as of today. And nobody has a lens on what innovation and disruption would be happening. So big changes happen because of the unleashing of the innovation and the animal spirits of the private markets and private individuals. And the governments really don't control that. And yet, the way Satish was describing, the policymakers do have a pertinent role in focusing the resources and the attention, and also shaping the behavior of the corporations and the individual. So they all have a role.
I mean, the energy sector is the maximum, produces most of the greenhouse gas emissions. Do you think there's enough technology and transformation at play that that we're able to change how we produce, store, transport, consume energy? I know it's going in the right direction, but is it enough for us to be able to meet the net zero goal that the world is targeting? Which is 2050, to hold back the global warming under 1.5.
I believe we will achieve our goals much sooner than that. Because again, if you look at the deployment, the growth in the deployment of solar and wind, if you see the nuclear energy is coming back too. If you see even coal, for example, which everybody is so worried about right now for good reasons, the carbon capture technology is improving so quickly now that within 5 years you will have full-scale coal plants retrofitting carbon capture technologies, eliminating 95% of the CO2 from going into the air, and taking that CO2 and selling it for profit in the marketplace, because now they can capture CO2 for $30 a ton and sell it for $60 a ton. By the way, the current prevailing prices for CO2 is $120 a ton. So the coal plants suddenly will not only be selling power, they'll be selling clean power, and they will also be selling CO2 at a profit. So in 10 years, the situation is going to look dramatically different. Solar itself, the cost of solar plus battery storage for residential applications in the US will become cheaper than what I pay for grid electricity today. And they will probably hit that point in 3 years in most of the US. So we are going to be achieving our carbon mitigation goals much sooner than 30 years. The speed of advancement is just not grappled today by the policymakers, or even by large segment of the private equity industry.
Interesting. Nice to hear that. Philippe, what about what are your thoughts around I didn't mention about Brazil, but Brazil and beyond that, how do you think we are as a world globally going towards the goal?
Yeah, so listen, regarding the technologies, I'm also positive, such as Praveen, and I believe that, if you see something that Greenpeace wrote, they wrote that a lot of people are trying to criticize some initiatives from government or corporations to tackle climate change. And these critics started to generate a kind of fear of some people about the technology that you have so far. So people started to feel comfortable and say, you know what, let's wait for technologies. Let's wait for the new technologies. And why they are not ready? Let's just stay here in our comfort zone. So it's a problem, Actually, in the end of the day, again, as Praveen said, we do have a lot of technologies coming from all over, even in developing or developed countries. And what we need is like a mix of Satish said and Praveen said. It's the awareness of both the government and the tech and the corporations to interact more with these technologies. A lot of corporations are investing in corporate venture capital, which is a good way. A lot of corporations are hiring innovative teams just to deal with startups because they have different levels for negotiation and different speed. And I believe in this in this kind of mindset and changing the mindset of the industry in order to find a better tomorrow. And everything needs to come together. I think it's a mix, it's the mix of the corporations investing in startups and opening opportunities for pilots and for implementation of new technology, with awareness of government to work together, such as BRICS are doing, and helping those with more challenges to solve. That's what I think.
One of the perspective, that again, the naysayers, we need both sides always. 100 minus 100 is equal to 0, 10 minus 10 equals 0. So you focus on balancing what you're producing versus focusing on reducing, like the Amazon forest is the biggest carbon sink for the world, on land. But I don't know if there's enough focus on, reducing deforestation there. So is it going to be as simple as, as a country which continues to has been profiting from carbon emissions from an economic perspective, to be able to buy some carbon credits in some other country? I mean, is it sustainable, just from a naysayer perspective, right? I mean, and that's what, so our targets for 2050 are great, but I don't think there are too many targets for 2030. I think from electronic vehicles, we come to, Shailesh next, but the question is, for us to be able to go from 5% of EV vehicles around the globe to 60% in the first 10 years, is there enough on the policy stage? Let's take India as an example, for you to be able to build that kind of ecosystem that you're trying to build today.
Good question. So, Ranvijay, I think innovation always precedes policy. So when the policy is still figuring out what is happening, the innovation comes and figures it out. And sometimes innovation and policy run in the in tandem, and magic happens, as we have seen the payment space in India. Likewise, in EV space, the governments are pretty much what you call of the aware what is going on, and we are seeing very lot of favorable policies. I will give you an interesting example. India has almost sold 4 billion worth of electric rickshaws in the country, right? There are more than 2 million EVs running in the country, which nobody has noticed. And it has happened without any incentive, any subsidy, anything else. there's a very ugly kind of a vehicle, which is basically pipe and batteries combined together. And each vehicle kind of saves almost 4 tons of CO2 every year, and also takes one family out of poverty. And for that, the poor people have, given their right hand, which is almost paid 50% interest rate to buy those vehicles. Now, this is happening despite lack of policy, despite anything else, because it is a very economical solution. Same way, so whenever we think of globally, we think of EVs, we think of Tesla, very expensive, fancy cars. But what is happening on the ground in India is two-wheeler. So in India, two-wheelers consume almost 65% of petrol. So almost 65% of petrol is consumed by two-wheelers. And if you move the country of these two-wheelers to electric, it is not going to disrupt the grid the way four-wheelers does, because it doesn't need that kind of fast charging. So there are a lot of things which are happening, and I think policy is also very aligned towards it. And I think energy is very critical area. And as Praveen mentioned it, that solar event is fine, but I think nuclear is making a very huge comeback. And I'm very excited about those areas. I think there's too much to talk on solar and wind. I think the real game changer is going to be nuclear probably, right? Because that is a large source of energy. Because the idea is not to kind of go towards what you call disrupt the existing chains of coal or whatever. So I think overall, if you see the pace of thing, it's very positive, and the grid will anyway handle, and the kind of energy you need to save power, 30-40 odd million of two-wheeler EVs, we have enough power there. So I do not see any challenges that way, Sahay.
One thing I'd like to bring in is there is something called very visible aspects of any change. And then there are some very dominant invisible aspects. So if you see, for instance, the impact of the ocean traffic, that's way beyond what we imagine in terms of what the traffic on land does. And there are many studies showing that the ocean traffic basically creates way more negative impact on the environment than or carbon footprint as such than a lot of things that we're talking about. But they're not very visible to us. So I think we should look at from developing countries' point of view, which are the major impact areas which don't involve people. Secondly, you very nicely mentioned that e-rickshaws. I would say a bunch of it goes to two factors. One, of course, it became cheap enough, and India created a very, very, you can say, almost an alternative model, something nobody else in the world is going to use, because that's what India likes to basically look at it, because that's what it's ready for. But one particular minister, politician, he became vested interested in that, became a big champion of that. He drove it to that point. And if you don't recognize that, then we will fail to understand how things actually move when market is not ready, when technology is not at the point of creating the cell phone of that solution as such. So I think we should keep this also in mind.
Listen,
I wanted to add a couple of thoughts. One is, I think availability of power or energy is no longer an issue. There is adequate power that is available for most things, whether it is EVs or otherwise. It's the question is, what is the nature of that power? The other is, Satish mentioned ocean traffic. I think there's a need to actually rethink supply chains. We have in business spent the last 30, 40 years thinking about the most rationalized, globally distributed supply chains. But while we capture the cost of movement actually in COGS, manufacturing and movement, we don't actually really capture the carbon cost of that. And while yes, as a company, as an individual company, or as shareholders, we can feel justified in saying, well, because we are generating a carbon footprint because of movement, we will offset that by planting trees or afforestation, and we will offset. But what if we were to fundamentally rethink the supply chain and not create the carbon footprint in the first place? Mm-hmm. So this vocal for local, and it is not merely Atmanirbharta, which of course is a big, very important issue for India, Atmanirbharta, but having more local production and having production closer to consumption anywhere, whether it is you're importing tomatoes in the US from other countries versus growing them locally. Of course, a tomato grown in the US might actually be more expensive than imported from, say, somewhere else. Similarly, something manufactured in India might be more expensive than something manufactured in China. But think about the non-carbon footprint it is creating. So we are not creating the carbon footprint in the first place. Yes, it will impact supply chains, it will impact consumption. But in some ways, those are the fundamental changes in individual behavior, in societal behavior, and industrial behavior that we have to bring into effect. Then whatever the source of energy, whether it is coal-based, it is wind, it is solar, it is nuclear, I think those are all adjacent issues. We just have to, as a human race, start thinking differently about our own footprint on the planet.
I think
Well
here
said.
I would like to chip in. Basically, what Anjali is saying that, we have to try to sustain and reduce the consumption. The problem is, I think this seems a very valid line, but there's a lot of flaw in this. The point is, in India, just 4% of people use air conditioning today, right? Whatever we do, we have to increase to 30-40% because either 4% leave air conditioning or they may do that. So the whole pollution and climate change is basically an engineering problem, right? It's an engineering error. Because what engineering happened, the whole electricity generation and the power generation, it is more of the 18th century, right? In the time of Tesla and Edison. And in fact, if they come today, even today, right, they will know what's going on. The engineering, they will recognize the turbines. This is not the same case in the, say, IT sector. If you look at the chip design today, a chip has almost 1 billion transistors. So anybody who comes even from 1970 won't recognize a chip today, right? But it is not the same case in the what you call basic engineering. And that's where, because a lot of money and the research has not happened in these areas, and it has not happened there. So what we have the error, or the carbon or pollution, everything generated by these engineering is far bigger than what it's supposed to be, right? So whatever the way we modify the behavior, consumer behavior, it seems like a very easy part, and that's why I say that the awareness and the policy is not going to solve, because the 4% of people who use air conditioning today in the whole India or the emerging South, that number is going to go to 30% or going to go 50%, and there's not it is inhuman not to give that, right? It's not to deny that. So the only way it has to be solved is by a very massive investment in these areas, right? Where you create energy at a much cheaper cost with a much lesser pollution or footprint, because a lot of fundamental research which is supposed to happen there has not happened. Look at like the nuclear, like since 1965, majority of the research didn't happen there because of the policy or the noise or whatever majority of areas, right? And a lot of energy has gone towards the solar and the wind, which is okay, but I don't think is a very suitable for what you call a very stable and sustainable large economy, right? Because it's not still reliable. You cannot build what you call a city like Hong Kong on solar or a city like Bombay on solar. So I think the key issue is how do we find the technologies which is really designed for the 21st century and beyond, right? Where energy production is at a much, or what you call the error or the carbon footprint or the pollution created by this technology is much lower than what it was, because a lot of impossible things are happening. Look at driverless cars, look at chips, everything is happening today. I think we need to find the same equivalent into production of electricity, production of water, treatment of waste. So I think that is the need of the hour today.
So that raises an important point, right? So if, and to your, I completely agree, Shailesh, that if 4% of, there's only 4% penetration of ACs in India, that does need to go to 30%, right? Given our climatic conditions and so on. And they're all, everything I agree, that there needs to be better air conditioning technology and so on. The today's issue though, is it will, while Moore's law will kick in, it has kicked in solar power, which is why, you're able to get bids at, 2 rupees 40 paisa and so on. Till that happens, somebody has to finance it. And so climate financing is also a very important issue. And it is a little bit of a north-south issue, where developing countries are still on the upward curve of energy consumption. And till these technologies are developed and kick in and so on, and I think Ranvijay made that point that we may have a target for 2050. What about the 2030 target? How is that actually going to get financed? So climate financing is an equally important issue.
Correct.
Who's going to pay for it and how?
So I believe your thing here. Sorry. Yeah. Okay, Philip. Yeah.
I just want to say like that. You both said important things as well. Like the last question for Anjali, I believe that it's a cycle. If the corporations are investing in new technology or solutions, their investors, especially if they are a listed company, they will choose to invest in this company instead of investing in the other company. So it's all a cycle, and this company will be ahead of other companies because they started to invest in something to tackle climate change or to reach net zero carbon emissions. And in the end of the day, this strategy will certainly keep the corporation as a great corporation to work, as a good product to buy, as a great supplier for others, as as I said, a company to invest, or even a great reference for multinationals. So I started to see that in the market. Corporations started that started to invest in new technologies, or started to act before some emissions regulation or something like that appeared. They started to be as reference, and things started to happen for them. Like, really, when I say things started to happen to them, I'm talking about money and capital going to the company. So it's all a mix. It's again, to reinforce what I said in the beginning, I believe that it's all a mix between corporation initiatives and public initiatives, but also a mix between the technology that must be implemented. We can't be only in electric vehicles. We can't be only in solutions to the ships in the ocean. We do need to support all the initiatives to reduce the impact.
I'm loving this debate because we have, Shailesh, who talks about the engineering part, and Anjali, who's talking about the capital market issues, and Satish, throwing light on the policy matters and how they fit into that equation. And all of them have to come together. And for both Shailesh and Anjali, there are two concepts that really make it all work. One is what Bill Gates termed as the green premium. So invent technologies that are actually cheaper and more affordable than the technologies available today, while providing the same comfort or value and a lower carbon footprint, right? If you achieve that, you really have a winning mix, and you don't need to worry about how it is going to scale up, because capital flows like water. It will flow to the plate to the point where it generates the maximum return with least amount of risk. And if you are generating solutions that solve that question about where is the return going to come from, capital will just find its way there. One of the things which has become almost a permanent feature of the global economy in the last 10 years is that the economists call it, there is an excess liquidity sloshing around the world. There is just too much capital chasing returns. And any sector of the economy that shows a promise of return of better than 5% at a low risk, gets overabundance of capital flow. And the United Nations or the World Bank, doesn't necessarily have to say we are going to deploy this money into, because there is this huge amount of capital looking for opportunity to invest. So yes, you need to find the right engineering solutions. The capital markets will take care of themselves as long as new technologies and new innovative solutions are coming up, which have a negative green premium rather than a high positive green premium, which is what the policymakers assume today.
So I want to just take the debate one step lower to the companies level. So we have different guidelines that countries like New Zealand, UK, and a lot of others are adopted, which is like guidelines by, for example, Task Force on Financial Disclosures. For companies to disclose their impact on climate, define the risk, right? Make it as part of what you do as your annual disclosures. In some countries, they're doing fine, they're doing well. In others, they are not doing as fast as you would like them to do. And there was a point I made earlier, because just back to the strategies for net zero, carbon emission, unless you do enough in the first 10 years, you never know how the next 20 will go, right? Obviously, assuming all the, the technology we're talking about do come true, right? The negative emissions technology, like you mentioned about being able to absorb, Praveen, or being able to create these massive carbon sinks, where there is a question about, taking carbon credits for planting trees, how many years, 100 years they take to be able to absorb that carbon, and does it make sense, right? What about adhering the companies to some kind of a protocol and legal stuff? How do you do it world over, right? Because again, this is a disparity in some countries that are stepping up, being able to do it.
Ranvijay, I would like to add something here. I think companies are like good examinees. For instance, I was talking to the Vice Chancellor of Delhi University because I was interested in one aspect. They get people who get 99, 100% marks. I said that given the number of people who have been 99%, 100% marks in Delhi University in the past 10 years, all problems of India should have been solved. What happened? So then I heard from the Vice Chancellor, what he said is something very interesting. Even these guys who get 100% marks, only 5-6% of them become good enough to go to international environment. What I'm trying to say is I'll take you to CMM debate in the context of IT sector. Some people talk about IT here. When CMM became possible, capability, maturity, model, information technology, suddenly India was way ahead of any other country in getting CMM certification level 5. At the same time, its capability remains somewhere else. So we will be good examinees, but we will not be good learners. Corporations do the same thing. Corporations, no matter what rule you create, they'll create compliance. They'll comply with it. But what kind of compliance will be? It will be strict compliance to the letter, not the spirit of the idea, because they have to be responsible to multiple other things as well. So corporations are very, very good at that. Give them anything. That depends on what kind of compliance impact is going to have. So we got to be aware of that as well. Corporations are good examinees, but they don't learn from that. Just like Indian students are great in getting good marks, good first class, whatever they call that, but they don't create or innovate. And that is something we should be aware of. Thanks.
Just to add here, Ranvijay, if you look at the ESG index globally, in fact, in India also, the top companies, which are top ESG companies, I won't name them, but one is a petrochemical company, one is a paint company, and one is a diesel manufacturing company, diesel automotive manufacturing company, right? So that sums up the indexes, ESGs, and everything else, right? So what worse can be? And as Satish said, I think everybody, whenever you make a rule, so they say that whenever the God makes a chapel, the devil always make a chapel there. So it's always that way. I think the only way that this thing can be solved in a VC way, which is a faster, better, cheaper. And I will go back to what Anjali said earlier, and she had mentioned earlier also, that we need to find companies which creates profit and impact. And until that thing is solved, nothing is going to happen. And here is a very interesting point. Look at Uber. Uber has raised close to $25 billion to create a valuation of hardly for $50 to $60 billion, right? Just 2x of impact, and is still making losses as of today. I think the biggest challenge with the impact company and ESG companies are that they start from a what you call their own burden. When they go to investor, they say, "Oh, we are impact, we won't create returns." Who's creating return? Show me a company today which is creating a very profitable 30% EBITDA. I don't see anyone, right? Whether it's tech, non-tech. But the issue is ESG guys are playing so in a defensive mode all the time that, oh, we don't make money, that the money doesn't go there. It's not that the Uber is creating 40% EBITDA margin or their WeWork was creating 60% EBITDA margin, nothing, right? The issue is the narrative. And I think that's where the biggest damage to this whole narrative is that we say it's impact. I say company should say, I'm making this energy, I'm doing is faster, better, cheaper. That's it, right? Or like say what Praveen is saying, or even, like say this energy company, the coal company can sell CO2 also. So it is an energy, innovation there, right? So why I should play defensive? Why I should say, oh my God, I create impact, so don't ask me returns. And though I do create 18% or 20% return, right? So the capital is obviously constrained because capital is a most scary person, right? It always runs away. And when the guy who's pitching, he says, oh, I'm creating impact, they think, oh, it is these are the activists, these are the sloganeers, and they run away. Not that the Uber is creating tons of cash either. So I think the biggest issue in the whole segment is how do we divert capital to this, as Anjali said very correctly, because at the end of the day, everything will solve by finance. There is nothing else. I think the capital has only got us Apple, Cisco, Intel, everything else. And same way, the next wave of thing, what has happened digital in 20 years will happen in the climate sector or the engineering sector in the next 20 years. The only thing I think we have to change the narrative or have to tell the better stories probably.
And to build on that, I think we need to have really embedded in large companies, particularly the integrated business model. And there are companies that have been able to do it. Take Unilever, for example, right? Unilever continues to be a great magnet for talent because all the young people want to go work there. They see a sense of purpose. And Unilever took this under Paul Polman's leadership This conscious call and the narrative that they shifted was not only will we be the best consumer company in the world, we'll be the best responsible company in the world, right? So that shifted the narrative. They invest as much in wash as they do in the product R&D. Tata Group is like that. Tata Group has always said our primary purpose, of course, will generate profit, because without profit, you have no enterprise. But it will be responsible. It will be in the service of communities. So that is one way to do it. Absolutely. The other way to do it is to, even as quote unquote impact companies, and I'm so glad you brought this up, Shailesh. Why do we think that profit and purpose cannot coexist? They must coexist. I think all companies should be purposeful. So profit and purpose have to go together. And capital is moving to profit with purpose. You cannot do profit alone or purpose alone. And when it comes to ESG measurement, I think we still do have to give mining companies and diesel engine producing companies a bit of a break here, because the world still needs their product. Correct. So let's give points to companies that are still in somewhat dirty industries, where definitionally they will have a larger carbon footprint. Whether it is mining, power, the world needs commodities. If you stop mining, where will we get all our minerals and find materials for our batteries, right? So we need to do mining.
But can we get the mining done?
Yes, so we do need mining, we need power production, we need coal, we need all of that, we need shipping, all of which are definitionally high carbon footprint. But can we not give them points for actually making progress to offset, investing in the technologies that will be net positive versus just neutral? So yes, I think ESG measurement has a long ways to go. So let's take greenwashing aside, but give points for people who are actually making progress.
Absolutely. I would like to learn a little bit about how the capital flow is, what's the state of capital flow in the renewable or the sustainability sector in India. In the US, just in the past 12 months, when we started the company, the firm and our portfolio companies would struggle to raise $10, $15, $20 million in the marketplace. And in the last 12 months, they are successfully and somewhat easily raising $100, $200 million rounds. And the public markets also, demonstrate a very eager appetite for these kind of companies. So the availability of capital has just exploded for green, sustainable companies. What's the situation in India right now?
So India is emerging. So we have India is kind of mixed right now. So I think mobility is seeing a huge traction. Electric mobility is seeing good numbers. And India, traditionally, the whole climate investment have been on the infrastructure side, which is solar, wind and all, which I do not see them as a climate. They're not so tech side. But tech side, we are seeing very green shoots. I think Anjali can add more on this. But generally, it is still early. I will say it is starting, but yes, not yet there where US is.
So I'll take the positive side for a change. In talking about investment and taking, the fact that this is that a lot of entrepreneurs are here listening to you. There's a massive business opportunity at play, right? And you're looking at clean energy investment tripling to 4 trillion by 2030 annual and so forth. So what are your thoughts on that? Because I think a lot of entrepreneurs would love to, pick your brains to see what's the next best thing.
I'm very bullish. I think, like I said, that's definitely the next 2 decades. The confluence of ideas. And again, India, particularly right now, we again have a very magical situation where we have the technology, we have the ideas, and very importantly, we have the talent. I think we have probably one of the best talent pools one has ever seen in the entrepreneurial ecosystem, and it's only getting better. Only getting better. So very, very bullish. I keep going back to integrated business models, where it is not just about doing good for the planet, but doing good for the planet in a commercially sustainable, scalable way, in a way that will get adopted. So capital is available. Capital is hungry to find opportunities. We are constantly looking at opportunities, whether it is, and we invest actively. We are active investors in agri-tech, in big data analytics that support alternative food, alternative energy. So I think there's, for all the entrepreneurs listening in, go forth, be brave, find new technologies, as Shailesh mentioned, and the capital will come to you.
Exactly. Ranvijay, I don't know how much time we have, how many time we have.
Yeah, we'd love to listen from you.
probably the final thought. So I just want to first to say that one of the best things here was what Anjali said, that, you know, we all need mining, we all need all of that, all the energy that we are consuming. And we all know that sustainability means meeting our own needs without compromising the ability of the future generations to meet their own needs. So we will still need mining and everything. But it's very brave when companies start with some solutions. For instance, even my startup, when mining companies decided to apply our solution in their blast furnaces or industrial boilers to reduce the impact from burning fossil fuels and so on, or other fuels. And it's beautiful. And again, I just want to reinforce that, you know, we don't need to wait like the ship industry they did. Like the owners of big fleet of ships, they started the IMO 2020 to say that it's mandatory to reduce sulfur oxides emissions. They waited for that to started to invest in gas scrubbers, to started to invest in different fuels and so on. And it was more expensive to invest by this time. So if you do it before, it's much better. And now, like Maersk, for instance, they just invested a lot of money in 8 ships that will run by methanol and also will burn fossil fuels at the same time. But they did it, and they are investing a lot, even knowing that it might be a risk, because the customers, the mind of the customers started to change. So they believe that a company like Amazon, for instance, will prefer to hire their ships instead of other ships because of the environment impact. So it's all about, you know, taking the initiative and trying to forget the challenge that it might have, and giving the first step or feeding all the steps that the companies or corporations and governments started. Because only by doing that, only by being brave and by being resilient in a real change, we will change. And I really believe that we all need to work together.
So much. I think that's a perfect way to end it as a statement. Just to summarize, I didn't plan it to be such a positive conversation, and we didn't plan the panel thinking that. But you know, it's nice to hear all that, and the positivity is great. Thank you so much for being part of the panel. I think this was enlightening and very positive and promising. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. I think Philippe said it best. We all have to do this together.
He ended it very well, yeah.
You said the best. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Bye.
Bye-bye.